The morning of Daniel Carter's 10th birthday broke over Willow Creek with a deceptive calm, the kind that tricks you into believing the world is safe, gentle, and kind. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of his cramped bedroom, casting golden patches across a desk cluttered with pencils, erasers, and half-finished sketches that spilled from his beloved sketchbook like whispered secrets. Daniel, a wiry boy with chestnut hair that perpetually fell into his wide, inquisitive eyes, woke with a grin that seemed to light the room from within. His sketchbook, a spiral-bound companion as vital as his heartbeat, lay within arm's reach, its pages brimming with fantastical houses, tangled forests, and figures that danced on the edge of dreams and reality. Today, his 10th birthday, promised something extraordinary, not just the milestone of double digits, but a grand adventure, a hike through Blackthorn State Park, a sprawling wilderness of pine trees, winding streams, and hidden glades that seemed conjured from the pages of a fairy tale. Mark Carter, Daniel's father, a lean man in his late 30s with a storyteller's glint in his hazel eyes and a smile that could coax laughter from anyone, had spent weeks orchestrating the day. He'd packed a canvas backpack with meticulous care, peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a thermos of tart lemonade, a battered first aid kit with band-aids and antiseptic, and a trail map so worn its creases felt like scars under his fingers. In the kitchen, Claire, Daniel's mother, a third-grade teacher with a voice soft as a summer breeze and hands steady from years of guiding young minds, sliced apples with a precision that belied the tremor in her heart. She watched Daniel bound down the stairs, his sketchbook tucked under his arm like a shield, his grin wide enough to swallow the morning whole. "Draw something magical today," she said, ruffling his hair, her fingers lingering as if to anchor him to her, to this moment, to the safety of their small, tidy home. Daniel nodded, his eyes sparkling, his mind already sketching towering pines, shimmering streams, and houses born from dreams. The drive to Blackthorn was a symphony of anticipation, the old pickup truck rattling along the winding roads. Daniel pressed his nose to the window, his breath fogging the glass as Willow Creek's tidy houses, red brick bungalows, and clapboard cottages gave way to rolling hills and the dark, endless forest. Mark sang off-key to a folk tune on the radio, his voice weaving tales of Blackthorn's past, lumberjacks who carved paths through the wilderness with axes and sweat, miners who vanished in forgotten shafts chasing veins of silver, and a hermit whispered about in town, who lived deep in the woods guarding secrets no one dared name. Daniel listened, his pencil scratching furiously in his sketchbook, capturing a gnarled tree with roots like claws, a deer frozen mid-leap, a hawk's piercing eyes glinting in the sunlight. By the time they parked at the trailhead, the sketchbook was heavier, its pages alive with the forest's pulse, each stroke a testament to Daniel's boundless imagination. The trail was a winding ribbon of dirt and pine needles, marked by weathered wooden signs and the faint echoes of other hikers' footsteps. Daniel skipped ahead, his sneakers kicking up dust, his sketchbook bouncing against his side, its spiral binding glinting in the sun. Mark followed, his heart swelling at his son's energy, the way he seemed to drink in the world. "Look at that hawk," Mark called, pointing to a red-tailed bird circling above, its wings slicing the sky like a blade. "Bet you could draw it better than nature did." Daniel laughed, a sound like bells, and flipped to a fresh page, his pencil dancing to capture the hawk's fierce gaze, its feathers etched with a precision that belied his age. The forest hummed around them, crickets chirping in a lazy rhythm, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant gurgle of a stream weaving through the trees. It was a perfect day, the kind that felt eternal, as if time itself had paused to watch them, father and son, bound by love and adventure. By midday, they reached a clearing where a stream glinted like liquid silver under the summer sun, its surface rippling with secrets. Daniel plopped cross-legged on a flat rock, his sketchbook open on his lap, his pencil moving with a quiet intensity. He began to draw a house from a dream he'd had the night before, a crooked cabin with a slanted chimney, its windows dark and secretive, framed by twisted pines that seemed to lean inward, whisper. Beside it, he sketched two shadowy figures, their faces undefined, standing close as if guarding something unseen, their presence heavy with an unspoken menace. Mark watched, marveling at his son's focus, the way his small hands moved with a purpose that seemed older than his 10 years, as if he were channeling something beyond himself. "I'm just gonna check the map," Mark said, stepping a few yards away to unfold the creased paper, its edges frayed from years of use. He squinted at the faded lines, tracing their route, the forest's hum lulling him into a fleeting sense of peace, a moment where the world felt. When he turned back, Daniel was gone. The clearing was still, unnaturally so, the air thick with a silence that pressed against Mark's chest. Daniel's backpack lay abandoned on the rock, its straps tangled like a discarded toy, its contents spilling a pencil, a granola bar, a crumpled tissue. Beside it, a single torn page fluttered under a pebble, caught by the breeze, its edges jagged as if ripped in haste. Half a house, 2 figures, no Daniel. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs, a sickening thud that drowned out the forest's song. "Daniel," he shouted, his voice raw, fracturing the silence like glass. He spun, scanning the stream, the dense wall of pines, the underbrush that seemed to pulse with secrets. Nothing, no footprints in the soft earth, no broken twigs, no trace of his son. The forest, so alive moments ago, now felt like a predator, its silence a taunt, its shadows hiding something sinister, something that had swallowed his boy whole. Mark stumbled through the clearing, calling Daniel's name until his throat burned, each shout a desperate plea swallowed by the trees. His hands shook as he clutched the torn sketch, its jagged edge slicing into his palm, a physical echo of the panic tearing through him. Blood welled, a single drop staining the paper, but he barely noticed. Daniel was cautious, curious but not reckless, a boy who'd never strayed far without looking back to check for his father's smile. He wouldn't wander off, would he? The thought looped, a relentless torment, as Mark sprinted back to the ranger station, his boots slipping on loose dirt, his breath ragged, his mind a chaos of fear and denial. The station, a squat building at the park's edge, with peeling paint and a creaking door, was a blur as he burst through, his words tumbling out in a frantic jumble. "My son, Daniel, he's gone by the stream, please, help." Rangers mobilized with grim efficiency, their radios crackling with urgency, their faces set in lines of practiced determination. By dusk, Blackthorn State Park was a battlefield against the unknown. Helicopters thumped overhead, their searchlights slicing through the canopy like desperate fingers, casting fleeting glimpses of the forest's secret. Bloodhounds, led by handlers, with grim jaws and eyes that had seen too many searches end in sorrow, scoured the underbrush, their bays echoing like mournful cries through the deepening twilight. Volunteers flooded in, locals with worried eyes, hikers who'd walked these trails, strangers moved by the radio's urgent plea, their voices crackling through walkie-talkies, combing every inch of the forest, their flashlights bobbing like lost stars in a sky gone dark. Claire arrived, her car screeching into the lot, her teacher's composure shattered like porcelain dropped on stone. Her eyes were wild, her hands clutching Mark's arm, nails drawing blood as she whispered, "Where is..." Her voice was a fragile thread, fraying with each syllable, her body trembling as if the ground itself might give way. "Mark, where is he?" The first night was a descent into a private hell, a purgatory of waiting and dread. Mark and Claire sat in a ranger's trailer, surrounded by topographic maps spread across a folding table, styrofoam coffee cups littering the floor, and radios spitting static that grated on their frayed nerves. Ranger Tom Bradley, a grizzled man in his 50s with a voice like gravel and eyes heavy with unspoken truths, coordinated the search, his updates delivered with a calm that felt like a betrayal. "We've covered the main trails," he said, his gaze fixed on the map, avoiding the raw desperation in their eyes. "Tomorrow we'll hit the ravines, the caves, the old mining shaft." Mark nodded, numb, his fingers tracing the torn sketch on the table, its crooked chimney, and shadowy figures, a riddle he couldn't solve, a cruel puzzle that mocked his failure. Claire stared at it, her lips moving silently, as if the paper might whisper Daniel's location, if she prayed hard enough. Her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles gleamed white. Days bled into weeks, each one a fresh wound, a new layer of despair. The search grew frantic, then methodical, then a desperate clawing at hope that slipped through their fingers like sand. Divers plunged into the stream, their lights glinting off rocks and debris, searching for a boy who wasn't there, their faces grim as they surfaced empty-handed. Rangers rappelled into ravines, their ropes creaking under the weight of fading optimism, their shouts echoing in the hollows where no answer came. Psychics, unsolicited and unwelcome, called with visions, Daniel lost but alive, cold but breathing, hiding in a cave curled up under a tree, each one a cruel spark that fizzled in the face of reality, leaving Mark and Claire hollowed out, their hope a fragile thing battered by false promise. The media descended,
their cameras flashing like vultures' eyes at press conferences where Mark's voice cracked, his hands trembling as he held up the torn sketch, its jagged edge a mirror of his broken heart. "He's out there," he said, though doubt gnawed at his bones, a parasite he couldn't shake, its whispers louder with each passing day. Claire, clinging to her faith in Daniel's resilience, held the sketch like a talisman, its shaky lines proof that his imagination was still alive somewhere, somehow, a beacon in the dark. Their marriage buckled under the weight of guilt and grief, the seams of their love fraying under the strain. Mark replayed that moment by the stream, the second he'd looked away, the map unfolding in his hands like a betrayal, each fold a moment he could have kept Daniel safe. He spent nights in the garage, poring over maps, tracing paths Daniel might have taken, reading survival stories of children who'd defied the odds, a boy found in the Rockies after 6 days, dehydrated but alive, a girl who survived a week in the Smokies, her campfire a beacon that led rescuers to her side. The stories kept him awake, their words a lifeline he clung to, even as they cut deeper, reminding him of what he'd lost. Claire sought refuge in a support group at the community center, where parents of missing children shared their stories like a litany of pain, their voices, soft but heavy with shared sorrow. A mother whose daughter vanished from a mall parking lot, her purse left behind like a taunt. A father whose son never returned from a bike ride, his bike found in a ditch, its wheels still spinning. Each story was a mirror, reflecting their own fractured hope, but also a reminder that they weren't alone in their endless vigil, their endless. The torn sketch became a relic, locked in a glass case in their living room, its half-drawn house a jagged scar on their hearts, a reminder of the boy who'd vanished and the moment they'd failed him. Friends stopped calling, their pity too heavy, their words too empty, their visits dwindling as the months stretched into years. Willow Creek moved on, new families moved in, the diner got a neon sign, the park's trails filled with new hikers laughing under the same trees that had swallowed Daniel, but Mark and Claire remained frozen, their lives orbiting the absence of their son. The forest kept its secret, its silence a wall they couldn't breach, its shadows a maze they couldn't navigate. 14 years passed, each one a slow erosion of hope, a quiet theft of joy. Willow Creek grew, its edges softened by new subdivisions with manicured lawns, a shiny gas station with pumps that hummed, a coffee shop with Wi-Fi and chalkboard menus. But Mark and Claire's home remained a time capsule, its walls heavy with memory, its air thick with the weight of absence. The glass case in their living room gathered dust, the torn sketch untouched but ever present, its crooked chimney a silent accusation that neither could escape. Mark, now graying and gaunt, his face etched with lines that told of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers, worked as a landscaper, his hands calloused from digging earth that never yielded answers, his back bent under the weight of his grief. Claire taught 3rd grade, her soft voice soothing her students but hollow at home, her smile a mask she wore for the world, her heart a locked room, where Daniel's laughter still echoed. They spoke less, their conversations clipped as if words might summon the grief they'd buried deep, a volcano waiting to erupt.
Then, on a gray autumn afternoon in 2025, a stranger's post pierced the silence like a lightning bolt. It appeared on an online forum dedicated to missing persons cases, a digital haven where amateur sleuths, armchair detectives, and grieving families dissected cold cases with obsessive fervor, their keyboards clacking late into the night. The poster, identifying herself only as Jane, had been sorting through her late grandfather's attic in Pine Hollow, a sleepy town 20 miles from Blackthorn State Park, where the forest's shadow loomed large. Her grandfather, Harold Grayson, had died 6 months earlier, leaving behind a ramshackle cabin and a lifetime of clutter boxes of dusty books, rusted tools, faded photographs curling at the edges. Jane, tasked with clearing it out, had found something unsettling in the attic's dim cobwebbed corners, a child's drawing, tucked inside a tattered copy of Grimm's fairy tales, its pages yellowed and brittle. The drawing depicted a cabin in the woods, its chimney crooked, its windows dark as empty eyes, framed by pines that seemed to lean inward, conspiring. 2 adults stood close, their faces sharp and cold, their eyes narrow like predators stalking prey, their lips set in thin, unyielding lines. In the foreground, a boy, his face smudged but unmistakable, stared out from the page, his expression a haunting mix of fear and defiance, as if he were pleading with the viewer to see him, to save him. Jane's post was hesitant, her words laced with unease, each keystroke heavy with doubt. "Found this in my grandpa's things, it feels wrong, does anyone know what it is?" She'd uploaded a photo of the drawing, its colors faded but vivid enough to stir a jolt of recognition, a spark that set the forum ablaze. The style, the shaky lines, the muted greens and browns, it matched Daniel's torn sketch with eerie precision. But this page was whole, complete, no jagged tear, no missing half, as if it held the other piece of a puzzle that had haunted Mark and Claire for 14. The post spread like wildfire, ricocheting across forums, social media and X, where users tagged Mark and Claire's long-dormant advocacy page, a digital relic they'd abandoned when hope became too heavy to carry. Mark was pruning a client's hedge, the clippers heavy in his hands, the scent of cut grass sharp in his nose, when his phone pinged with a notification. He opened the link, his breath catching, his heart lurching as he stared at the screen, the world tilting beneath him. The house was identical, down to the crooked chimney, the angle of the roof, the way the pines framed the scene like silent witnesses to a crime. The figures, sharper now, a man and a woman, their lips thin, their eyes cold as winter, their presence a menace that made his skin crawl. And the boy, God, the boy was Daniel, his wide eyes and tousled hair captured in pencil strokes that felt like a punch to the gut, wound reopened after years of scarring over. Mark's hands shook, the clippers falling to the grass with a dull thud as he dialed Claire, who was grading papers in her classroom, her desk littered with gold star stickers and crayon drawings that mocked her loss with their innocence. "You need to see this," he said, his voice raw, barely above a whisper, trembling with a hope he hadn't felt in years, a hope that terrified him as much as it thrilled him. They met at home, huddling over Mark's laptop in their dimly lit kitchen, the air thick with the weight of what they were seeing, the hum of the refrigerator a mocking reminder of normalcy. Claire pulled the torn sketch from its glass case, her fingers trembling as she laid it beside the laptop screen, her breath hitching as she compared the two. The similarities were uncanny, the placement of the windows, the slant of the chimney, the way the trees framed the scene like silent sentinels guarding a terrible truth. Claire's fingers traced the boy's smudged face in the new drawing, tears spilling down her cheeks, her breath ragged, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. "It's him," she whispered, her voice breaking, a sob clawing its way out, her body shaking as if the truth might shatter her. "It's Daniel." They contacted the Willow Creek police, who'd closed Daniel's case years ago, relegating it to a dusty file in a basement cabinet, a forgotten tragedy among men. Detective Laura Hensley, a seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and a reputation for dogged persistence, took the lead. Hensley, in her mid-40s, had a no-nonsense demeanor softened by a quiet empathy for families like the Carters, her own heart marked by cases that never left her. She'd worked Daniel's case in 2011, a rookie then, haunted by the boy who vanished without a trace, his sketch the only clue, a ghost that lingered in her dreams. Now she drove to Pine Hollow to meet Jane, who was waiting at the local police station, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights, and a receptionist who chewed gum with a bored indifference. Jane, a librarian in her 30s with a nervous habit of twisting her hair, spoke in halting sentences, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone or something to burst in. Jane explained that her grandfather, Harold Grayson, had been a recluse, living in a cabin just outside Blackthorn State Park, a place where the forest's shadow fell heavy. He'd worked odd jobs, fixing fences, clearing trails, hauling lumber, always keeping to himself, his life a shadow on the town's edges, unnoticed but ever present. When he died of a heart attack, Jane inherited his property, a ramshackle cabin filled with decades of clutter, books stacked to the ceiling, tools rusted beyond use, photographs faded to ghost. She'd been sorting through his attic, a dim cobwebbed space that smelled of mold and secrets, when she found the drawing. It was hidden, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, her hands fidgeting with a loose thread on her sweater. Tucked inside a book like he didn't want anyone to see it, it felt heavy, like it carried something bad, something wrong. Hensley's team descended on Harold's cabin, a weathered structure hidden down a dirt road, its windows boarded with splintered plywood, its yard choked with weeds and brambles that clawed at their legs. The air inside was thick with dust, the room's a labyrinth of books, rusted tools and stacks of yellowed newspapers that smelled of mildew and time. But beneath the floorboards in the back room, they found a trapdoor, its hinges rusted but intact,
hidden under a threadbare rug that crumbled at their touch. It led to a small windowless compartment, barely big enough for a person to stand in, the air stale and suffocating, the walls stained with damp. Inside were journals, dozens of them, their leather covers cracked, their pages filled with spidery handwriting, cryptic notes and sketches that echoed Daniel's style with chilling precision, each one a knife to the heart. One entry, dated July 12, 2011, the day Daniel vanished, read, "Saw a boy by the stream, alone, curious eyes, he draws like I used to." Another, a week later, "The boy likes to draw houses. I showed him my cabin, he added a chimney, crooked, like." Mark and Claire, allowed to view the journals under police supervision, felt their stomachs churn, their hearts splintering with each word, each stroke of Harold's pen a violation of their son's memory. Harold's entries were a mix of observation and obsession, weaving a narrative that grew darker with each page, a descent into a mind unhinged. "The boy is quiet," he wrote, "he listens when I talk, he draws what I tell him." Sketches filled the margins, cabins with crooked chimneys, trees with branches like claws, figures that grew distorted, their faces cold and menacing, their eyes like voids that swallowed light. Mark's hands trembled as he turned the pages, each one a dagger twisting deeper, his breath shallow, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Claire clutched the torn sketch, her lifeline, her knuckles white as she read about her son's final days, her body shaking with silent sobs, her heart breaking anew with each word. Harold had been a drifter, a handyman who'd worked near the park for years, always on the periphery unnoticed but watching, his presence a shadow that chilled those who remembered him. Neighbors in Pine Hollow spoke of him with unease. He'd sit on his porch watching kids play at the park's edge. One woman, Mrs. Clara Dunn, told Hensley, her voice low, her hands twisting a dish towel as if to wring out her discomfort, never talked to them, just stared, like he was studying them, memorizing. Another neighbor, an old man with a limp and a face weathered by years, recalled Harold collecting things, books, trinkets, drawings, hoarding them like trophies in his cluttered cabin, his eyes gleaming with a hunger no one could name. The journals painted a chilling picture, each page a brushstroke in a portrait of horror, a story told in fragments of pencil and pain. Harold had found Daniel that day by the stream, alone and sketching, his backpack open beside him, pencils scattered like offerings to the forest. He'd approached, his voice soft, disarming, a predator cloaked in kindness, offering food, a place to rest, a chance to draw in peace. Daniel, trusting and curious, his heart open as only a child's can be, had followed, his sketchbook clutched to his chest like a talisman, his sneakers crunching on the path to a place from which he'd never return. For weeks, Harold kept him hidden in the cabin, feeding him lies as easily as he fed him stale bread and canned soup. "Your parents are busy," Harold wrote in one entry, his words cold and deliberate, a script designed to sever Daniel from his world. "They don't understand you like I do. Stay here where it's safe." Daniel's sketches filled the journals, houses with crooked chimneys, trees with branches like fingers, figures that morphed into Harold's own twisted fantasies, a man and woman, their faces cold, standing over a boy who grew paler, smaller, with each draw, as if his life were bleeding onto the page, his spirit fading with each stroke. But Daniel was clever, far cleverer than Harold knew, his mind a spark that refused to be snuffed out. He'd hidden clues in his work, subtle marks only a parent would notice, etched with the desperate hope of a boy who knew he was running out of time. The crooked chimney, always off-center, drawn with a deliberate wobble that screamed intention, a silent cry for help. A shadow in the window, shaped like a plea, its edges jagged with fear, as if Daniel were pressing his soul against the glass. A smudged face that held a flicker of defiance, as if he were staring down his captor through the pencil's tip, refusing to be erased. The torn sketch, Hensley theorized, was no accident. Daniel had ripped it in half, leaving the fragment by the stream, knowing it was his only chance to be found, a breadcrumb in a forest of secret. He'd poured his soul into those shaky lines, trusting that someone, Mark, Claire, anyone, would see them and understand, would follow the trail he'd left in pencil and courage. The truth came in fragments, each one a blow that shattered what hope remained, each revelation a wound that bled afresh. Daniel hadn't survived long. That winter a fever took him, his small body too weak to fight it in the damp unheated cabin, where the walls wept with condensation, and the air was thick with despair, the cold seeping into his bones. Harold panicked, his hands shaking as he realized his captive was slipping away, buried him in an unmarked grave behind the cabin, a shallow patch of earth, hidden by brambles and forgotten by time, the forest closing over it like a scar. He kept Daniel's drawings, tucking them into his journals like twisted keepsakes, as if they could preserve the boy he'd stolen, as if they could absolve him of the life he'd taken. The final entry, dated December 2011, was stark, its words heavy with finality. The boy is. The drawings are all I have left. The police excavated the grave, their shovels biting into the cold earth, each scoop a violation of the silence, a desecration of the boy who'd lain there for 14 years. Mark and Claire stood by, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles blanched, their grief raw and unending, yet softened by the closure they'd never dared hope for. Claire's sobs were silent, her body shaking as Mark held her, his own tears falling into the dirt, mingling with the earth that had held their son for so long, a final embrace they could never give him. But the story didn't end there, not with closure, not with peace. Detective Hensley's investigation peeled AE's 25/6 back layers of the mystery, revealing threads that tangled and frayed, each one leading to new questions, new doubt. Among Harold's journals was a mention of a woman named Evelyn Moore, a transient who'd stayed with him briefly in 2011, her name scrawled in the margins like an afterthought, a ghost in his narrative. Evelyn knows too much, one entry read, the words sharp, accusatory. Evelyn asked about the boy, said another, its tone laced with paranoia. Hensley tracked her down to a halfway house in a nearby town, a gray building with peeling paint and windows that rattled in the wind, its halls smelling of bleach and regret. Evelyn, now in her 60s, was a wiry woman with haunted eyes, and a smoker's rasp, her fingers twisting a frayed scarf as she spoke, her voice trembling with the weight of memory. She admitted to meeting Harold that summer, staying in his cabin for a few weeks to escape a violent ex, who'd left bruises she still felt in her bones. She'd seen a boy there, quiet, always drawing, his eyes wide but wary, like a deer sensing a hunter in the shadow. He didn't belong, she told Hensley, her voice breaking, her hands shaking as she lit a cigarette. I told Harold to let him go, but he got angry, said the boy was his, like he owned him. I left the next day. I was scared, not just for me but for that boy. Evelyn hadn't known Daniel's name, hadn't connected him to the missing boy plastered on the news, but her guilt had gnawed at her for years, a weight she carried like a stone in her chest, heavy and unyielding. Another figure emerged from Pine Hollow's shadows, Tommy Vance, a teenager in 2011, who'd mowed Harold's lawn for extra cash, his memories sharp despite the years. Now a mechanic in his late 20s, Tommy had a stocky build, and a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles, his eyes darting as he spoke, as if afraid the past might catch up to him. He remembered Harold's odd behavior, how he'd locked the cabin's back room with a padlock that gleamed new against the rusted door, how he'd snap if Tommy lingered too long near the porch, his voice sharp with a rage that seemed to come from nowhere. Once I saw a kid's shoe by the steps, Tommy told Hensley, his voice low, his hands fidgeting with a wrench he clutched like a talisman. Blue sneaker, scuffed, laces frayed, thought it was weird, but I didn't ask. Harold was intense, like he was hiding something big. The shoe, long gone, matched the description of Daniel's sneakers from Claire's tearful inventory, a detail that made her heart lurch when Hensley shared it, her hands trembling as she clutched the torn sketch, her eyes searching for answers in its line. The drawings held more secrets, each one a layer of the mystery that refused to stay buried, a puzzle that grew more complex with each revelation. Forensic analysts, brought in to study the journals, noticed inconsistencies in the later sketches, their trained eyes catching details that chilled them. Some lines weren't Daniel's shading too precise, cross-hatching too deliberate for a child's hand, as if an adult had taken his pencil and twisted his work into something darker. Harold, it seemed, had altered some of Daniel's drawings, blending his own with the boy's, as if claiming ownership of his imagination, his soul. One sketch, buried deep in a journal, showed the cabin from a different angle, its perspective skewed, its lines heavy with intent. In the background stood a third figure, a shadowy shape, barely human, its edges blurred as if drawn in haste or fear, its presence a question mark that loomed over the case. Was it Harold, projecting himself into the scene, Evelyn caught in a moment of complicity or horror, or someone else entirely, a figure still hidden in the forest's depths? The ambiguity gnawed at Hensley, who began to suspect Harold hadn't acted alone, that the cabin's walls held secrets even the journals couldn't tell.
A new lead emerged from Jane's attic, a discovery that deepened the mystery. Alongside the drawing, she found a photograph, faded, its corners curled like dead leaves, but clear enough to show Harold standing by his cabin, his face set in a grim line. A woman at his side, not Evelyn, but someone younger, with sharp features and cold, piercing eyes that seemed to stare through the camera, through time itself. The woman matched the female figure in Daniel's complete sketch, her posture rigid, her lips a thin slash of disdain, her presence a chill that lingered. Jane didn't recognize her, and Harold's journals never named her, referring only to a visitor in cryptic, guarded terms that hinted at tension, at secrets shared and regretted. But Miss Clara Dunn, the Pine Hollow neighbor with a memory sharper than her years, recalled a woman visiting Harold's cabin in 2011, driving a beat-up sedan with a cracked windshield that caught the sunlight like a warning. She didn't stay long, Clara told Hensley, her hands folded tightly, her voice low as if afraid the woman might hear her across the years. But she looked angry, like she was there against her will. I saw her leave one night, peeling out like the devil was chasing her, her tires kicking up gravel that pinged off my fence. Hensley's team scoured missing persons records, cross-referencing women in their 30s from the area in 2011, their fingers flying over keyboards, their eyes bleary from late nights and cold coffee. One name surfaced, Lila Monroe, a drifter with a history of petty theft, shoplifting, check fraud, a stolen car and a last known address in a trailer park near Pine Hollow, a place of sagging roofs and broken dreams. Lila had vanished that winter, her case barely investigated, dismissed as another runaway in a town that didn't care, her file a single page in a drawer. Her photo, grainy from an old arrest record, matched the woman in Harold's photograph, the same sharp cheekbones, the same cold eyes that seemed to see too much. Was she the woman in Daniel's sketch, her face etched by his pencil in a moment of fear? Had she been complicit, drawn into Harold's darkness, or another victim, silenced by it? The photograph and the drawing suggested a connection, but the trail was cold, Lila's fate a shadow that flickered just out of reach, a ghost in the forest's endless maze. The investigation took a darker turn when an elderly hiker, Arthur Klein, contacted Hensley after seeing the drawing on a news segment, his voice trembling over the phone. Arthur, a retired accountant with a passion for Blackthorn's trails, had camped near Harold's cabin in the summer of 2011, his tent pitched in a clearing where the stars felt close enough to touch. He remembered a night when the forest felt wrong, too quiet, the air heavy with a tension he couldn't name, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your heart race. He'd heard voices drifting from the cabin, a man's low and angry, sharp with menace, each word a lash, a child's pleading high-pitched cutting through the night like a blade, desperate and raw. I thought it was a family argument, Arthur said, his voice thick with regret, his hands trembling as he clutched a mug of cold coffee, its surface rippling with his unease. I didn't want to intrude. I packed up and left at dawn, told myself it was nothing. But there was more, a detail that haunted him, a memory he'd buried until the drawing brought it roaring back. I saw a woman's silhouette in the window, he added, his eyes distant, his voice barely above a whisper. She was just standing there, not moving, like a statue. It gave me chills, like she was watching something she couldn't stop, something terrible. Arthur's story added weight to the theory of a second person, a presence that lingered in the cabin's shadows, a figure who saw but didn't act, or acted and vanished. Was it Lila, Evelyn, someone else entirely, a stranger whose role in Daniel's fate remained a mystery? Hensley revisited the journals, searching for clues in Harold's spidery script, her flashlight sweeping over pages that seemed to pulse with secret. Single entry dated August 2011, mentioned a visitor who asked too many questions, the words underlined with a force that tore the paper. Harold's tone was sharp, almost paranoid. She doesn't understand. No one does. The boy is mine. The visitor wasn't named, but the timing aligned with Lila's last known sighting in Pine Hollow, a fleeting glimpse of a woman running from something or someone. Had she stumbled into Harold's secret, seen Daniel, recognized the wrongness of it, and paid the price? The possibility hung over the investigation like a storm cloud, heavy and threatening, its shadow darkening every. Mark and Claire,
Desperate for answers the police couldn't provide, their hearts raw from years of waiting, hired Sam Carver, a private investigator with a gruff demeanor and a reputation for finding what others missed. Carver, a former cop in his 50s with a limp from a bullet he'd taken in the line of duty, had a knack for reading people and places, his eyes sharp despite the lines etched into his face, his mind a steel trap for details others overlooked. He dug into Lila Monroe's past, piecing together a fragmented life. Born to a single mother in a dying mill town, Lila had drifted through foster homes, her childhood a patchwork of neglect and rebellion. She'd picked up a rap sheet for shoplifting, check fraud, a stolen car, petty crimes that spoke of survival not malice. She'd worked with Harold at a lumberyard near Blackthorn in 2010, their paths crossing in the gray space of odd jobs and transient lives, two lost souls drawn together by circumstance. Carver theorized Lila had been at the cabin when Daniel was taken, perhaps helping Harold, her own desperation binding her to his darkness, or perhaps trapped by him, her presence a mistake she couldn't escape. Her disappearance that winter suggested she'd fled, or been silenced, her body hidden somewhere the forest wouldn't tell, its roots guarding her secrets as fiercely as they'd guarded Daniel's. Carver interviewed Pine Hollow's residents, unearthing whispers of Harold's darker side, each conversation a step deeper into the shadows. A bartender at the Rusty Nail, a dive bar on the town's edge with sticky floors and a jukebox that played only sad songs, recalled Harold drinking alone, muttering about keeping things safe, his eyes glassy with something more than whiskey, his hands clutching a glass like it was all that kept him anchored. A gas station clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, remembered Lila buying cigarettes in July 2011, her hands shaking, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting pursuit, her voice barely audible as she asked for change. She looked scared, the clerk said, her voice soft, her hands fidgeting with a pen, its tip chewed to splinters, like she was running from something or someone. Carver's search led to a storage unit Lila had rented in Pine Hollow, its contents auctioned off years ago after she stopped paying the rent, her life reduced to a cardboard box. The buyer, an antiques dealer with a cluttered shop that smelled of dust and old wood, had kept a box of her belongings, letters to a sister she'd lost touch with, a locket with no photo inside, its clasp broken, and a sketchpad with crude drawings of a cabin. The drawings weren't Daniel's, their lines too harsh, too adult, but the cabin's crooked chimney was unmistakable, a chilling echo of the sketches that haunted Mark and Claire, a thread that tied Lila to the horror. The investigation stretched into months, each lead a thread in a tapestry of loss and unanswered questions, each discovery a step closer to a truth that seemed to slip further away. Hensley and Carver worked in tandem, their findings painting a picture of Harold as a predator who'd used his isolation to hide his crimes, his cabin a fortress of secret. Evelyn's testimony confirmed he'd kept Daniel hidden, feeding him lies to keep him compliant, his sketchbook a tether to the world he'd been stolen from, its pages a battleground where he fought with pencil and courage. Tommy's memory of the sneakers suggested Harold was careless, his secrecy unraveling under scrutiny, his arrogance a crack in his armor. Lila's role remained murky. Was she an accomplice, drawn into Harold's obsession, her own broken life making her complicit, or a witness who'd seen too much, her disappearance a consequence of her knowledge? The photograph, the drawings, the journals, they all pointed to her presence, but her fate was a void, a question mark that gnawed at everyone involved, a shadow that refused to lift. Then came another twist, a whisper from the forest itself, a memory that surfaced like a body rising from a lake. A park ranger, now retired, contacted Hensley with a story he'd kept buried for years, his voice heavy with guilt. In the fall of 2011, he'd found a child's jacket snagged on a thorn bush a mile from Harold's cabin, blue like the one Daniel wore, its sleeve torn, its fabric faded by rain and sun. He'd logged it as lost property, assuming it belonged to a hiker's kid, and stored it in the ranger station's lost and found, a dusty box in a corner. The station had burned down in a freak fire in 2012, the jacket lost to ash, but the ranger's memory was vivid, sharp as a blade. It had a drawing in the pocket, he said, his voice trembling, his hands gripping the phone, a little house, crooked chimney, drawn in pencil. I thought it was just a kid's doodle, now, I'm not so sure. The revelation sent a chill through Hensley, another piece of Daniel's trail, lost to time but alive in memory. A clue that had been so close yet slipped away. Another witness emerged, A woman named Margaret Cole, a librarian in Pine Hollow, who'd known Harold peripherally. She'd seen him at the library in the summer of 2011, checking out books on art, child psychology, and local history, his hands lingering on the pages, his eyes distant. He asked about old cabins in the park, Margaret told Hensley, her voice steady but her eyes uneasy. Said he was researching for a project. I thought it was odd, he wasn't the type for projects. She remembered seeing a woman with him once, not Evelyn, but someone with sharp features and a nervous energy, her hands stuffed in her pockets, her eyes scanning the room. She didn't speak, Margaret said, just stood there, like she was waiting for something or someone. The description matched Lila, another thread in the web, another shadow in the forest. The drawings, though, were Daniel's triumph, his legacy etched in pencil and pain, a testament to a boy who fought with everything he had. Forensic analysts found more clues, their magnifying glasses hovering over pages that seemed to pulse with light. A hidden letter D in the chimney's bricks, etched so faintly it was nearly invisible, a signature of defiance, a faint outline of a hand in a window pane, pressing against the glass as if reaching for freedom, its fingers splayed in desperation. Daniel had known he might not escape, but he'd left a trail, trusting his parents would find it, his courage a light that pierced the years. The torn sketch, left by the stream, was his final act of hope, a breadcrumb in a forest of secrets, a cry that echoed across time. Each crooked line, each smudged face, was a plea for help, a child's defiance against the darkness that took him, a testament to a spirit that refused to be broken. Mark and Claire, reading the analysts' reports, wept for the boy who'd fought with nothing but a pencil, his courage a beacon in their darkness. They framed the complete sketch beside the torn one, their living room a shrine to their son's courage, the glass case a window to his soul, its contents sacred. They didn't speak at the press conference that followed, their silence louder than words, their hands clasped, as they stood before a sea of cameras, their eyes fixed on the sketches, as if Daniel might step out from the page, his grin lighting the room. The media lingered, their questions a buzz of noise, but Mark and Claire stood together, their grief a shared weight, their love for Daniel a flame that burned eternal. Daniel's story didn't end with closure, with the cold comfort of a grave identified. His drawings, studied by art therapists and criminologists, inspired new methods for decoding trauma in children's artwork, their shaky lines a map to understanding pain. The crooked chimney became a symbol in training manuals, a reminder that even the smallest marks could hold profound truths, that a child's hand could speak when their voice was silent. Mark and Claire founded a non-profit in Daniel's name, funding art programs for at-risk kids, ensuring his imagination lived on in classrooms and community centers across the state. They spoke at schools, sharing his story, showing his sketches to children who saw themselves in his lines, their own pencils scratching out dreams and fears, their own stories finding voice through his courage. But late at night, when Willow Creek slept, its streets quiet under a blanket of stars, Claire sometimes heard a faint scratching, like a pencil on paper, drifting from the living room. She didn't look at the sketches in their glass case, didn't need. Daniel was still drawing, somewhere beyond the trees, his story unfinished, his courage eternal. The forest, once a place of loss, became a canvas for his legacy, its streams whispering his name, its leaves rustling with the echo of his pencil, its shadows holding the boy who'd fought with nothing but his art and his heart. And somewhere, in the spaces between light and shadow, Daniel's imagination still runs wild, his sketches a testament to a boy who faced the darkness, and left a trail of light for those who followed.